a love of poetry. But if you remember, was it last year or 2 years ago, they brought out Soundings again, which was the school book poem by
Augustine Martin.
F.X. Martin put it together, and it was very, very popular. We all remember. Well, I was going to say we all remember. I always remember little snatches like Jared Manley Hopkins, Louise Denner, and Felix Randy.
No, that's
I don't remember.
There's a guy in town here about the 7th of poems we learned in school, poems we once lived in. Tom March.
Yeah, with Lee Ryan's photographs.
Yeah.
It's a lovely production, actually.
Who's in town? Who did that?
Tom March.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new book. I saw it actually the other day in Castlebar. It's kind of.
That's Tom.
Yes. We kind of pick things that come out of mid-air, and I suppose that's something that's kind of, you have to be ready for that. I think Sylvia Plath said that it was a rare random descent that happens.
Didn't Michael Langley say once too, if I knew where poetry came from, I'd go there. And I read that about Colin McCain, is a New Zealand poet, and he said, poetry isn't in my words, it's in the direction I'm pointing. If you can't understand that, and you're appalled at the journey, stick to the guided tours. They issue return tickets. That it's kind of an openness to the world around you.
I suppose for me, writing poetry, I have a day job and stuff like that. I would never be brave enough to go off and rely on poetry for a lifestyle or anything like that, or for any kind of. There's so many casualties in that world of creativity, and I also think that when you kind of set yourself up in that place too, the thing can kind of dry up, So it's important as well to live a real life, to interact with ordinary people in an ordinary context, and to write about the real life, rather than kind of pushing yourself out into some kind of esoteric kind of place where you're not in touch with reality. I think you can be more authentic if you live a kind of relatively ordinary life. And as Patrick Kavanagh did, I suppose, in a way, he wrote about the Hams and the Britchell and the Winkers and all those things, And I met scholars from all over the world, and they wanted to know what they were and what you do with them. And I actually tackled an ass as a kid, and I know how to put all that gear on. And I used to bring them up to, I was up in Monaghan a few times, and I showed them where different places were in Monaghan, and they were fascinated, because the Kavanagh's poetry, as you were saying, all these little images in Kavanagh's poetry are world famous. They want to know where the fortress in Rock Savage, and they want to know about Glasdrummond Hill and all these places. These are professors from Athens, that I met in Monaghan at the time. So I suppose Kavanagh said that he celebrate, if you can describe the local, you can describe the world. He said that it takes a lifetime to know the corner of a field. But his argument was that if you know the corner of the field, the world is made out of fields, and so it's full of corners. And so in describing the minutiae of life, you actually capture the whole world. And if you travel around the world, you discover that anyway. That nothing changes really. It's the same deal when you wake up in the morning anyway. No matter where you are,
Auden said, wasn't it too, that poets hang around words the way bikers do around street corners? That it's kind of, it's an awareness, it's just an openness to the world, isn't it?
It is, I suppose.
That was Kavanaugh's great poem of this Homer made the Iliad.
That's right. That's the one that's coming around in my head.
Yeah, that's right.
The year of the Munich bomber.
I like poetry that tells me a story. I don't really understand an awful lot of poetry. I need to identify with it. Jers, I can understand. Paul Durcan I like, but a lot of it just goes over my head.
And who's your favourite?
I like Paul Durcan because, as I said, I can identify with a lot of it. But I'd think of all the old poems I learned at school, like Under the Spreading Chestnut Tree and Up the Airy Mountain, Down the Rushy Glen, and pieces like that.
The first time, I think I had no interest in poetry at school. I think, like a lot of people, it was something we had to learn, and that was it. And then when I was living in Africa, a friend sent me lifelines. Do you remember lifelines?
Oh, yeah.
Concern. It was for Concern.
Right.
And I think a bit like Maura, anything I couldn't understand, if I couldn't identify with it, I didn't really want to read it. And I thought that's what all poetry was. And then I suddenly started reading this book, and the variety just took me breath away. You know, because it was everything. You could read it, you could write about soup, you could write about chocolate, or you could write about Homer, or there was just, suddenly poetry made sense. It was just, you just wrote about things. I don't like poetry, as I echo more. I don't like stuff I don't understand. I do like to have to read a poem once or twice to get it, but I don't want to have to go looking for a dictionary or looking something up on Google. I like poets whom I have heard read. I love Jer's stuff, I like Terry's stuff, I like Maura's. I like that when I'm reading, I can hear their voices in my head. Otherwise, it doesn't really work for me. I adore Paul Durcan, I think, with passion. And Irla Mongi, who's a very good friend of all of ours, you all know Irla, very good poet as well, brought me to hear Paul Durcan read in Sligo a couple of years ago. And my God, it was like, he's just incredible. You know, and he's one of our own, of course.
Well, he has his own voice, his unique style.
It's completely unique, and I've seen him a couple of times, yeah. So that's poetry for me. I like poetry. I read poems of people who I've heard read, and I read a lot of our local poets. I like to read local anthologies, and because I know the people and I know where the stories are coming from, and that's why.
Do you know any lines? Like the rest of us?
No, I can't. I don't memorise poetry. I have such admiration for people who can stand up and read or can speak their own poems and then speak other people's poems, because I can't. I have to have something in front of me. You know, I've only one of my own poems that I will just say, because it's only 4 lines, so it's easy to remember. I don't know. Well, I call it a poem. I'm proud of it. It's called Romance Irish Style. Do you want to come up and father the cattle? Wants to show off the new slatted shed. Who would have thought that silage and shite would one day turn my head?
In secondary school, they say to me, will you do the unseen poem with them? I said, I will not. That's not what I'm here for. They want you to kind of, because the teachers themselves are so unsure of how to deal with the poem. And there's this unseen poem often used to be on there, no, still on, not the leaves. And like, it was a torture, because the teachers themselves, you know, because they studied English and everything, but they studied it as like you'd study maths or something.
Yes, that's
and
the thing.
You know, then you had to do the novel, and they could break formulas and so. But their hearts really wasn't in the bloody thing, you know. Because I taught English myself for a while, and you have to be in it, and it has to be part of, you know. And I said, no, that's your job, do it. And I find that that's the problem. When everyone says, would you do the unseen, you know bloody well the kids are getting nothing out of this stuff now. Do you know?
It's accessibility, really, and making the thing accessible to everyone, you know.
It is, yeah.
Poetry was such an austere medium for so long.
It was, yeah.
That it belonged to the academics in the universities, you know. And like the ordinary people weren't allowed into it, really, in some ways, you know.
But the sad thing
you know,
is,
when it comes to contemporary music, for example, all the rappers and all those guys, you know, and the folk musicians, you know, like, why is it that Leonard Cohen, when he puts 3 chords onto a poem, like, he can sell 100 million copies of it, you know, or Bob Dylan, like, you know, and yet, like, if you look at one of Leonard Cohen's songs, or one of Bob Dylan's songs, and I'm on a cold Monday morning, like, it's all right, like, it's not brilliant, right? Do you know what I mean? But it's just that the medium that they use is different, you know.
That's right.
The medium that they use is a popular medium, you know.
But there's a problem here in this country too. I write a lot for kids, poetry and stuff, and I do a lot of work in schools and everything, you know. And I cannot get children's poetry published in Ireland. Nobody will. They won't touch it, and they say, "Oh, there's no market for it. We have nowhere." And I said, "Wait a minute. I sell an awful lot of books." Children's, because I've done all over the bloody world doing stuff in schools, you know, and but they won't touch it because it's somehow a little bit. They're not quite sure what's going on. It's not simple. It's, you know, you'd be writing about like the back seats in our classroom are scratched, written on, and the legs are loose. So you're kind of going on a lot with everyday things for kids, you know, which is poetry. I'd be on about the rhythm, and it's a bit like, you know, working a little bit like rap and all that stuff. but they don't want anything to do with it. It has to be something different, you know. And I find that really sad.
But
It's
yet,
the way it
we
was taught, I
run.
think, for so long. The way it was taught and the
Respect.
road and business. I mean, I was beaten up for not knowing my poetry, you know.
That's right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And if you have wealth in your hand, like, because in Irish, if you didn't have a Sheena Fata, like, and all the rest of it in your, you know, we were beaten up quite a lot growing up, you know, because it was a time of corporal punishment, you know. And it was basically, you know, you were assaulted by an adult for not knowing your poetry, you know. So, you see, you make the association then as you grow up. Like, poetry means kind of punishment and hassle, and I don't want to have anything more to do with poetry. And that's why when most people left school at the age of 18, they never read a poem again for the rest of their lives, because just got out of that as quick as they could. And I mean, I know people who just used to ceremoniously dump their books over the bridge, like, when they finished their leaving cert, you know, and never read a book after that. You know, which said a lot about the educational system, you know.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to come back from that, like. It's the way Irish is taught. I mean, why is it that the kids spend about 15 years learning a language, and then they learn another language, which is maybe French or Spanish, and they're better at speaking French or Spanish after the leaving cert than they are at speaking Irish?
Look,
There's something wrong there.
At the moment, I speak German fairly fluently, and because I've lived there for so long. But I learned it in a couple of years. You know, I learned the language basically, and I speak it now. I really am very fluent in it. And at the moment, I'm doing a bit of a thing with a friend of mine in Kilchima. He's interested in doing German, so we're chatting a bit in German and in Irish. And I see, my God, I spent how many years in school doing Irish, and I'm stumbling and stuttering, trying to find a few words. And if you say to me, "Will you say that in German?" I can say it all day. I don't have to. Now, what?
The problem is, you see, that I think there was so much emphasis placed on grammar, you know.
There was,
getting the grammar right. And if you didn't get the grammar right, you were in big bother, you know. Instead of kind of stumbling into it in a naive fashion and just learning a whole pile of vocabulary, like you do when you go to Spain and you pick up loads of language, and you really enjoy it, you know.
That's right. But you know what, when you talked there a minute ago before, I did my take dip in Galway in Colosgenia, and I remember walking into the school to do my first lesson, and I walked down the corridor in Colosgenia into the 70s, and bloody hell, I could hear someone going all banging the stick in a room, and it was all coming back to me, myself getting hammered at Swinford. And I thought to myself, jeez, what's going on here? So I knew the room I was going to, and I thought I had to stand for a minute and say to myself, hang on a minute, are you going into a classroom? If you ever think that you're going to hit a child, that's the day to never come back.
But just on that children's thing with poetry, we were Iarla started it a few years ago, and I helped him out one a couple of years ago with it. We ran a competition for national school children, poetry for national school children and secondary school children. We filled the Linen Hall. We had a couple of hundred entries from children as young as 8 and 9 up to 18 and 19. So, and we just went in, and there was no, I think the prize was €20. Like it wasn't like they were going to win a trip to Germany or anything.
No.
So the children were happy to be writing the poetry, their own words and their own poetry. So there was, it seemed like a natural thing for them, obviously, to write it. Imagine something,
it is,
and yet then it gets stifled. So.
But it
You had
depends.
some wonderful teenagers here at this open mic.
We had some fantastic teenagers.
Well, especially
your
your competition there, the what do you call it, the slam.
Oh yeah.
We had a great young fellow reading there. He was brilliant, like, you know. And I don't know where he is tonight, like, but I mean, he was a really strong voice, you know.
That it is a natural. It is poetry is somehow natural in people. It's
the iambic pentameter is part of our psyche, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the rhythm. We have it automatically in our. It's part of our genetic costume.
I think poetry is something that's kind of outside. It's kind of quite an anarchic medium, like, you know. It doesn't have too many strictures around it, you know.
No.
Like a lot of the contemporary music is a bit like that too. Like, I mean, but it's a form of ultimate expression. It's the distillation of language, really, you know. And, you know, people, and a lot of people in the west of Ireland speak in a very minimal way. You'd hear guys in pubs that speak in a very minimal way, and sometimes they're spitting out bits of poetry because they've been kicking around a couple of phrases in their heads on their own all day. They might be building a wall or something. You know? And suddenly when they come into the pub, like, this bit of language comes out, you see. And I think if these fellas would never read a book around like that, but they're very good on the phrases and the measurement of language.
That's right.
You know, and what poets and short story writers often do, they just go into the bloody pub and kind of rob all these phrases from these guys, you know, and kind of cut and paste them and put them into a short story or put them into a thing, you know. And, you know, it's like the classical musicians like Tchaikovsky and Dvorak and all them fellas. They actually went out to the villages in Russia and all over Eastern Europe, and they listened to the folk music being played in houses, and they brought it back. They brought back the rhythm of what they heard in the folk clubs, and put it into symphonies. So if you listen to some of the big symphonies, like actually it's just folk music that they brought in and put a structure on, and called it this pastoral symphony, you know.